In the vastness of space, where even the stars have lost their mystery, an ancient secret lies buried beneath the eternal ice of a forgotten planet. Hidden far below the frozen crust, it waits, silent, patient, holding truths about humanity that could shake the understanding of an entire galaxy. And now, the excavation has begun. Cale Nick's iron mind spoke into his recording device, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he adjusted the sensitivity of his thermal suit. Temperature -40 degrees by local measurements. Team is proceeding with excavation of Site 7. The wind howled across the frozen tundra, whipping crystals of ice against the protective dome surrounding the dig site. Kyle Nix's scaled fingers danced across the holographic control panel, adjusting the dome shield to compensate for the increasing storm intensity. "By the 7 moons, I hate this frozen rock," muttered Lyra Dawnflare, his assistant, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with irritation as she calibrated their scanning equipment. "Remind me again why we're freezing our tails off on this backwater planet." Cale Nix's upper lip curled in what humans would recognize as a smirk. "Because, dear Lyra, this backwater planet somehow produced the most terrifying species in the known galaxy, and we're standing on top of what might be the key to understanding how." The scanner chirped, its 3-dimensional display showing clearly defined structures beneath the ice. Kyle Nix's heart chambers all skipped a beat simultaneously. "They're level 47, Sector 12. That's no natural formation." "Bringing up the molecular reconstruction now," Lyra announced, her previous complaints forgotten in the excitement of discovery. The holographic display shimmered, revealing the ghostly outlines of what appeared to be a settlement, but unlike any settlement they'd found before. "Professor Bright-Eye," shouted Ro Talonshade, their junior researcher from the excavation pit. "You need to see this immediately." Kyle Nix glided down the gravity-assisted ramp to where Ro stood, surrounded by a collection of objects that had just been freed from their icy prison. His scientific mind struggled to process what he was seeing. "These tools," he whispered, picking up what appeared to be a spear. "The craftsmanship is primitive, but the engineering principles..." He turned the weapon over in his hands, noting the perfect balance. The precise angle of the head, the aerodynamic shaft. "That's not the strange part," Rose said, pointing to the dating results floating in the air beside him. "These are from their Ice Age period, before they had even developed basic power generation, before they understood atomic theory or space flight, or even electricity." Lyra slid down to join them, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of their excavation lights. "But that's impossible. These designs, they're almost perfect for their purpose. The metallurgy alone should have been beyond them for thousands of years." Kyle Nix carefully placed the spear back in its preservation field. "No, not impossible. Remember what we learned in first contact studies? Humans have always been different. When the first ships arrived, everyone expected to find ruins, a dead civilization that had destroyed itself like so many others. Instead, they found them in space." Ro finished, already reaching for the stars. "Exactly." Cale Nix activated his personal scanner, sweeping it across the excavation site. "And now we're starting to understand why. Look at these settlement patterns, the way they arranged their dwellings, the tool placement. Every single detail speaks of survival, not just existence, but mastery over these conditions." The storm above grew stronger, rattling their protective dome, but none of the archaeologists noticed, too absorbed in their findings. Piece by piece, they were uncovering something that would shake the foundations of galactic anthropology. Their bodies weren't built for this climate, Lyra observed, examining a preserved piece of clothing. No natural insulation, no secondary heating system, not even basic temperature regulation beyond their primitive metabolism. Yet they didn't just survive here, they thrived. Kyle Nix nodded, his four eyes gleaming with scientific excitement. And that, my dear colleagues, is exactly why we're here. The Galactic Council wants to know how. How did a species with no natural advantages, no biological adaptations for extreme environments, become the most successful survivors we've ever encountered? He paused, looking at the ghostly outlines of the ancient human settlement. And I have a feeling we're about to find out. Security level override accepted. Playing recovered data stream, announced the ship's AI as Kyle Nix and his team gathered around the holographic display in their research vessel's main laboratory. I still can't believe these recordings survived, said Lyra, adjusting the playback settings. The preservation quality is remarkable, considering the age of the storage medium. The first images flickered to life before them, scenes captured by early human recording devices. The footage was grainy, damaged by time, but still clear enough to make out the figures moving through landscapes of endless white. Fascinating, breathed Rowe, leaning forward. They're tracking something. His third eye twitched nervously as he watched the humans move across the frozen terrain with a grace that seemed impossible, given their bulky protective gear. The recording showed a group of humans following tracks in the snow, moving with a steady, relentless pace that made Kyle Nix's scales ripple with unease. Notice their movement pattern, he said, gesturing to the display. They're not just following, they're pushing their prey to exhaustion. That's barbaric, Lyra whispered, her luminescence dimming slightly. Most species would use ranged weapons or traps. Why waste so much energy? The answer came in the next recording. They watched as the humans pursued a massive creature across the tundra, following it for what the data indicated was 3 full planetary rotations. The beast was clearly stronger, faster, better adapted to the cold. But the humans kept coming. Look at their core temperature readings, Rose said, pulling up the analytical overlay. They should be dead. Their bodies are operating well beyond normal endurance limits for their species. No, Kyle Nix corrected, his voice filled with growing understanding. This is normal for them. We've been analyzing their physiology all wrong. We thought they were fragile because they lack natural weapons or armor, but their weapon is persistence itself. The next recording showed the humans finally catching their prey, exhausted and unable to continue running. What followed made even the seasoned xenobiologists uncomfortable. By the void, Lyra muttered. They're not even using their weapons to kill it quickly. They're just walking up to it, getting close enough to touch it. The psychological impact alone. Now you're beginning to understand, Kyle Nix said. Imagine being that creature. You're stronger, faster, better adapted to survive. But these creatures just keep coming. No matter how far you run, no matter where you hide, they never stop. They don't get tired. They don't get tired. They just keep following until you can't run anymore. The team watched recording after recording, the H1 revealing new aspects of human hunting and survival techniques. They saw humans crossing frozen lakes, testing ice thickness with tools they'd crafted. They watched them build shelters from nothing but snow and ice, creating warm spaces in the deadliest cold. These recordings, Rowe said, pulling up another file, They're not just showing hunting. Look at this. The display shifted to show humans gathered around fires, working with tools, teaching younger members of their group. They're passing knowledge down, Kyle Nix noted. Not through genetic memory like the hive species, not through neural links like the cloud mines. They're teaching through demonstration, through story, through shared experience. But the inefficiencies, Lyra protested, the time it takes, the resources wasted on failed attempts. That's exactly what makes it brilliant, Kyle Nix countered. Every failure teaches them something new. Every success adds to their collective knowledge. They're not just surviving, they're constantly adapting, improving. The final recording showed something that made them all fall silent. A group of humans, surrounded by a blizzard that should have killed them instantly, were dancing, actually dancing, celebrating in the face of conditions that would have driven most species to huddle in fear. I think, Kyle Nix said slowly, we've been asking the wrong questions. We wanted to know how they survived these conditions. But the real question is, how did these conditions create them? What kind of species emerges from an environment that should have killed them 1,000 times over? Lyra's bioluminescence pulsed thoughtfully. A species that doesn't recognize impossible odds. A species that turns brutal survival into celebration. A species that looks at the deadliest conditions their planet can produce and sees opportunity. The Galactic Council isn't going to like these findings, Rose said, saving the recording data. This goes against everything we thought we knew about species development. The Council, Kyle Nix replied, his 4 eyes fixed on the final frozen image of humans dancing in the storm, needs to understand what we're dealing with. These weren't just primitive beings stumbling through survival. These were the architects of their own evolution, using intelligence and sheer determination to reshape themselves into something their planet never intended them to be. And now they're in space, Lyra added quietly, still dancing in the storm. Research log, supplemental testing human hunting methodology, has proven more challenging than anticipated. Kyle Nix recorded, trying to catch his breath. His thermal suit blinked warning lights about system strain. This is madness, gasped Lyra, sprawled in the snow beside him. Even with their advanced environmental gear, they'd only managed a fraction of what the ancient humans had done. We've been at this for 6 hours and haven't even matched their initial pursuit phase. Rose stood nearby, monitoring their vital signs through his portable scanner. Professor, our energy expenditure is nearly triple what the humans recorded, and we're using powered assistance. The math doesn't add up. They'd spent the last several days attempting to recreate the hunting techniques they'd observed in the recordings. The Galactic Council had demanded practical verification of their findings, refusing to believe that any species could achieve such feats without technological assistance. Dot, stand up, Kyle Nix commanded, forcing himself to his feet. We're going to try again. Ro, replay the tracking sequence we observed. The holographic overlay appeared before them, showing ghost images of ancient humans moving across the same terrain. Their movements seemed deceptively simple, a steady ground-covering pace that never quite broke into a run. Look at their foot placement, Kyle Nix pointed out. The way they distribute their weight, it's not just walking. It's like they're having a conversation with the landscape. Lyra snorted, her bioluminescence flickering with exhaustion. A conversation? They were just walking. No, Ro interrupted. excitement creeping into his voice. "The professor's right. Watch this." He overlaid their own tracking patterns on top of the ancient humans. "See how we're fighting against the terrain?" They worked with it. Every step preserved energy. They spent the next hour trying to mimic the movement pattern. Slowly, they began to understand. The humans hadn't just been walking. They'd developed a whole body technique that maximized efficiency. "Remarkable," Kyle Nix said, checking their new data. "Our energy consumption dropped by 40% once we adapted their method. But this is just the beginning of what they did." The team moved on to the next phase of their recreation, tracking, and prediction. The humans hadn't just followed their prey. They'd anticipated its movements, cut corners, and forced it to expend extra energy. They're using the weather against their prey, Lyra realized, watching their simulation play out. "See how they drive it into the wind? The snow blinds it, makes it work harder to move, while they can follow its trail with minimal effort." "And look at this," Rowe added, pulling up another data set. They coordinated their rest periods with their prey's natural stopping points. When the animal needed to rest, they pushed harder. When it was running, they conserved energy. Kyle Nix nodded, his 4 eyes gleaming. They turned their prey's strengths into weaknesses. The animal's superior speed meant it tired faster. Its thick fur meant it overheated more easily when forced to run. They didn't need to be stronger or faster. They just needed to be smarter. The team's respect grew as they continued their analysis. Every aspect of the human hunting technique revealed new layers of sophistication. "The spears we found," Lyra said, examining one of the replicas they'd made. "They weren't just for killing. They used them for balance while crossing difficult terrain, testing snow depth, even as supports for temporary shelters." "Multi-purpose tools," Rowe agreed. "Minimal weight, maximum utility. And look at how they distributed equipment among the hunting group. No single human carried everything they needed. They depended on each other." "That's what we've been missing," Kyle Nix said suddenly. "We've been trying to recreate this as individuals, but it was never meant to work that way. The technique only functions as part of a coordinated group effort." They spent the next several hours working as a team, each taking on different roles they'd observed in the ancient hunting parties. The results were dramatic. "Our efficiency just doubled," Rowe announced, checking the data. "When we work as a unit using their methods, we can maintain pursuit for almost as long as they could. Almost. But we're still using advanced technology," Lyra pointed out. "They did this with nothing but shaped sticks and stone tools." "That's what makes it so brilliant," Kyle Nix replied. "Modern galactic hunting methods rely on overwhelming technological advantage. Stun fields, molecular disruptors, neural suppressors. We've evolved past our limitations by removing the need to deal with them." "And the humans?" Rowe asked. "They evolved past their limitations by embracing them, by turning them into advantages. They couldn't outfight their prey, so they outlasted it. They couldn't survive the cold, so they learned to use it as a weapon. They turned their greatest challenges into their greatest strengths." The storm was picking up around them, but none of them moved to take shelter. They stood there, 3 alien researchers in the howling wind, finally beginning to understand. "The Council's assessment protocols are useless here," Lyra said finally. "How do you quantify this? How do you measure the ability to turn desperation into inspiration?" "We don't," Kyle Nix answered. "We just acknowledge it. And perhaps," he paused, looking out across the endless white expanse, "perhaps we should be grateful that when humanity finally reached the stars, they came as friends rather than hunters." Speaking of hunting, Ro said, checking their environmental readings, we should head back. The storm's getting worse. No, Kyle Nix replied, a strange light in his eyes. Not yet. We're going to complete at least one full hunting sequence. We owe it to them to understand exactly what they achieved here. Lyra and Ro exchanged glances, then nodded. Together they moved out across the tundra, following trails left by ancient hunters, learning step by step what it meant to survive like a human. Warning, structural integrity of ice, cave at 64%. Proceed with caution. The scanner chirped as Kyle Nix and his team made their way deeper into the newly discovered chamber. Another drainage channel, Lyra noted, her bioluminescence providing extra light in the dim cavity. They engineered this entire space to stay dry despite being surrounded by ice. The chamber opened up before them, revealing walls covered in ancient markings. But it was the center of the room that stopped them in their tracks. A perfect circle of stones, each placed with obvious care, surrounding what appeared to be an ancient hearth. This isn't just another shelter. Kyle Nix breathed, his scanner sweeping the space. This is something else entirely. Ro, start mapping every detail. The junior researcher was already working, his hovering drones capturing three-dimensional images of every surface. Professor, these patterns in the stone placement, they match astronomical alignments. Winter solstice, summer solstice, equinox points. A calendar, Lyra suggested, but Kyle Nix shook his head. Not just a calendar. Look at the spacing between the gathering areas. He pointed to worn depressions in the ground. These aren't random, they're arranged by family group size. This was their meeting place, their heart. The team moved carefully through the space, each discovery adding to their growing understanding. They found storage areas cleverly hidden in the walls, preserved remnants of ancient ceremonies, and tools unlike any they'd seen before. These carvings, Lyra said, her fingers hovering over the wall markings, they're not just decoration, they're teaching tools. Look, this sequence shows hunting formations, weather prediction patterns, migration routes. And here, Ro added from across the chamber, social hierarchies, but not what we expected. The positions keep shifting in the drawings. Leadership wasn't fixed. It changed based on expertise needed for different challenges. Kyle Nix stood in the center of the circle, his four eyes taking in every detail. Now we know why their survival techniques were so sophisticated. This wasn't just about staying alive. This was their university, their government building, their temple, all in one. The deeper they explored, the more the chamber revealed. They found evidence of complex ceremonies that served multiple purposes, celebrating successful hunts while teaching hunting techniques to younger generations, marking seasonal changes while preparing for new challenges. These people understood something we've forgotten, Kyle Nix said, studying a particularly detailed wall section. They didn't separate survival from ceremony. Every practical skill was embedded in ritual, making it memorable, meaningful. Professor, Ro called from a small alcove, you need to see this immediately. They gathered around what appeared to be a collection of small carved figures, arranged in a specific pattern. Each figure was different, yet they were clearly meant to be together. It's their origin story, Lyra whispered, her luminescence pulsing with excitement. Look, these figures show them coming from a warmer place, each generation adapting, changing, growing stronger in the cold. Not just adapting, Kyle Nix corrected. They're celebrating the adaptation. These aren't images of suffering, they're images of triumph. Each figure shows a new skill mastered, a new understanding gained. The team spent hours documenting every aspect of the chamber, their respect growing with each discovery. This wasn't the primitive survival shelter they'd expected. This was a sophisticated cultural center, preserving knowledge that meant the difference between life and death. The Galactic Council won't understand, Lyra said finally, as they prepared to leave. They'll see primitive tools, basic art, simple structures. They won't see what we're seeing. What are we seeing? Ro asked, still recording final measurements. The birth of human resilience. Kale Nixa replied. This chamber tells us something crucial about their species. They didn't just survive these conditions. They created meaning from them. They turned mere existence into something greater. He touched one of the carved figures gently. Every challenge they faced became part of their story. Every skill they learned became part of their ceremony. They didn't just pass down survival techniques. They passed down the will to survive. As if in response to his words, the storm outside grew louder, its howling a reminder of the harsh world these ancient humans had faced. But standing in their ceremonial chamber, surrounded by the evidence of their determination to thrive, the sounds seemed less threatening and more like a chorus celebrating human achievement. We should seal this chamber, Kyle Nix decided, not to hide it, but to preserve it. Future generations need to see this to understand what it tells us about humanity's journey to the stars. Transmission to Galactic Council Anthropological Division, Priority 1. Kale Nix began, standing before the recording array in their ship's communications center. Final analysis of Earth Ice Age Settlement Project 2487B follows. Lyra and Ro sat nearby, adding their data streams to the transmission. The evidence they'd gathered over the past weeks would revolutionize galactic understanding of human development. Honored Council members, Kyle Nix continued, his voice steady despite his excitement. We must fundamentally revise our assumptions about early human development. Our findings indicate that humanity's current position in galactic society is not a deviation from their evolutionary path, but its logical conclusion. The holographic display showed their compiled evidence, tools, hunting techniques, social structures, and ceremonial sites, each piece adding to a picture that would shake the foundations of xenoanthropology. Previous theories suggested that humans achieved their current capabilities through random mutation and lucky technological breakthroughs. We now know this to be completely incorrect. Their rise was inevitable, shaped by forces we're only beginning to understand. Ro activated the simulation they'd prepared, showing the progression of human adaptation during the Ice Age. The crucial factor we overlooked was their response to adversity. When faced with conditions that should have caused extinction, they didn't just adapt, they transformed the very concept of survival. Their technological achievement wasn't finding better ways to avoid challenges, Lyra added, highlighting specific examples from their research. It was developing better ways to face them. Each problem solved became a stepping stone to solving bigger problems. Kyle Nix moved to the next section of their report. The implications for our understanding of species development are profound. Humans didn't evolve despite harsh conditions. They evolved because of them. The Ice Age didn't merely destroy their species. It created what they would become. The display shifted to their analysis of the ceremonial chamber. Their social structures were far more sophisticated than previously believed. They developed complex knowledge-sharing systems that combined practical skills with cultural meaning. This wasn't primitive superstition. It was an ingenious method of preserving crucial information across generations. Most significantly, Kyle Nix continued, we must revise our assessment of current human capabilities. Their modern achievements aren't a surprising leap forward. They're the natural progression of abilities they began developing millennia ago. Rowe brought up their comparative analysis. Their current space exploration methods mirror their ancient hunting techniques. Persistent, resourceful, constantly adapting. Their problem-solving approaches today show the same patterns we observed in their Ice Age settlements. But the most crucial finding, Lyra interjected, concerns their potential for further development. Every challenge they overcome doesn't just solve a problem. It becomes part of their cultural identity, driving them to seek new challenges. Kyle Nix nodded, moving to his final points. The Council must understand. We're not dealing with a species that accidentally survived impossible conditions. We're dealing with a species that was forged by them. Every trait that makes them successful in galactic society today was developed in response to conditions that should have destroyed them. The display showed their final simulations, projections of human development based on their new understanding. Their current technological level isn't their plateau. It's merely their latest step. Their history suggests a pattern of turning limitations into advantages, of transforming survival requirements into opportunities for advancement. Recommendations, Kyle Nix stated firmly. First, immediate revision of human development classifications in all galactic databases. Second, comprehensive review of current human technology assessment protocols. Third, and most importantly, recognition that human potential cannot be measured by standard metrics. He paused, considering his next words carefully. The humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Our research suggests a crucial addition in adversity is the forge of advancement. Their Ice Age wasn't a near-extinction event. It was their crucible. Final observation, he concluded. The question isn't how humans survived conditions that should have destroyed them. The question is, what couldn't they survive? What challenge couldn't they transform into an advantage? Based on our findings, I submit that the answer is none. Lyra added the last data streams to the transmission. The humans we know today, the ones reaching for the stars, aren't different from their Ice Age ancestors. They're the same people, using the same fundamental approaches, just with better tools. And perhaps most importantly, Rowe concluded, they're still learning, still adapting, still seeking new challenges. The traits that kept them alive in the Ice Age are now driving them to explore the galaxy. Kyle Nix made his final statement. The Council must understand we're not just documenting humanity's past. We're witnessing their future. Every challenge they overcome makes them stronger, more adaptable, more determined. The Ice Age didn't break them. It proved them unbreakable. End transmission, he said quietly, then turned to his team. The Council won't like this report. It contradicts too many established theories. The Council, Lyra replied with a flicker of her bioluminescence, will have to adapt, rather like the humans did. Breaking news. Human expedition successfully establishes first deep space colony beyond Andromeda Gate. Kyle Nix watched the news broadcast with his 4 eyes fixed on the screen, a strange mixture of pride and vindication washing over him. 20 years had passed since his team's groundbreaking Ice Age research, and humanity had proven their conclusions right. in ways even they hadn't anticipated. "Professor Bright-Eye," called out a voice behind him. He turned to see Lyra, her bioluminescence now showing the distinguished patterns of a senior researcher. "The Council has requested your presence. It's about the new human achievement." The Galactic Council chamber hummed with nervous energy as various species representatives discussed the latest human milestone. Kyle Nix couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere was from when he'd first presented his Ice Age findings. "Professor Bright-Eye," the council leader began, "you once told us that human potential couldn't be measured by standard metrics. Today they've proven that again. They've done something our finest minds deemed impossible." "No," Kyle Nix corrected gently. "They've done exactly what their history suggested they would do. They faced an impossible challenge and turned it into an opportunity." The display showed the human colony thriving in conditions that had defeated every other species' attempts at settlement. The humans hadn't just survived there. They were already expanding, adapting, improving their methods. "The most remarkable thing," Rowe said from his position as chief xenoanthropologist, "isn't that they succeeded, it's how they succeeded. They used the same principles we discovered in their Ice Age settlements, working with hostile conditions instead of fighting them, turning environmental challenges into advantages." "But there's something else," Lyra added, bringing up new data. "Something we've just confirmed. The humans, they knew. They've always known." The chamber fell silent as she displayed her findings. Ancient human stories, passed down through generations, telling of their Ice Age trials not as tales of hardship, but as instruction manuals for facing impossible odds. "They preserved everything," Kyle Nix explained to the stunned council. "Every lesson, every technique, every bit of wisdom gained from their early struggles, not in their technology or their science, but in their stories, their myths, their very way of thinking." "You mean?" the council leader began. "Yes," Kyle Nix confirmed. "Their success isn't despite their primitive beginnings. It's because of them. Every achievement, every breakthrough, every impossible task accomplished, they're all built on foundations laid during that ancient struggle for survival." The council chamber erupted in discussion, but Kyle Nix barely heard it. His attention was caught by a new transmission from the human colony. They were celebrating, dancing in their environmental suits under alien stars, just as their ancestors had danced in the Ice Age storms. "They're not just surviving out there," he whispered to his old friends. "They're already planning their next impossible achievement, and they'll succeed just as they always have." "Because that's what humans do?" Lyra asked with a knowing flicker of her bioluminescence. "No," Kyle Nix replied, watching the celebration, "because that's what humans are. They don't overcome the impossible. They reshape it until it becomes possible. They didn't just survive the Ice Age, they became it, relentless, adaptable, unstoppable." As if to emphasize his point, a new message appeared on the main display. The human colony was requesting permission to attempt an even more ambitious expansion. The council leader looked at Kyle Nix. "Will they succeed?" "Wrong question," Kyle Nix answered, his 4 eyes gleaming. "The real question is, what will the rest of us learn from watching them do it?" Outside the council chamber, Earth shone like a jewel in the darkness of space, its ice caps gleaming. To most species, those frozen wastes were monuments to nature's harshness. But now they knew the truth. They were humanity's proving grounds, the crucible that had forged a species capable of reshaping the very boundaries of possible. And somewhere in those ancient ice fields, a chamber still stood, its walls telling the story of how humanity had learned to dance with the impossible and won the end.